All right, and so welcome again to Moses, God's friend. I've always been fascinated with the fact that in Scripture it says that Moses and God spoke face to face, that the Lord spoke to Moses as a man speaks to his friend, and to be able to do that, to have that kind of relationship with God, that's not something that I expect to experience in this life. In fact, if it did happen, I'd probably be terrified, like everybody else in the Bible that happened to. But to just the idea that God would be willing to be friends with a human being, what a privilege, what an amazing thing. And so then that all the more to me makes Moses somebody worth looking at, worth studying. As we go through over the next, it's going to be 6 sessions. One thing to mention as we're getting started here, I really hope, and I apologize, I really hope that nobody went and cleared all their Wednesdays, because something's kind of come up for me that makes Wednesday not a real great day. And unfortunately, that kind of came up after all of this was published. So if we can move to Tuesday, I would really appreciate it and be able to do it. So I'm very, very sorry if you went out and cleared your schedules for Wednesdays. Again, my apologies, but I'll be sending everything out for recording and live conversation on Tuesday evenings. But over the next 6 weeks, we're going to pull certain episodes out of Moses' life. We're not going to hit everything. In fact, we're starting with the call of Moses. We're not starting with his birth. By the time we meet Moses, he's already going to be 80 years old. We're kind of skipping over those first 80 years for Moses. But the ones that I've chosen, I think, all show something special about this relationship that God has with Moses, and how he ended up having such a unique and close relationship with the Lord our God. So, so big idea at the very beginning. You see, I'll share so that we're sure everyone can see. So Moses and God seem like unlikely friends. Moses is a failed Egyptian royal, a murderer on the run, a nobody shepherd in a backwater country, actually worse than a backwater country, a desert. And yet Moses is going to become the greatest prophet of all the Old Testament. How is that transformation going to happen? How will this relationship with God and Moses, how can that even possibly come to be? How can that become a reality? And so I think we're going to see where that comes from, how that happens in our first reading for today. So if you're following along in Canvas, what you can do is just hit the next button if you're in the discussion, because that'll just take you to the very next question. Oh, I forgot something. The first thing I was going to do is I was going to grab my cigar lighter that I had from way back when I didn't care what I smelled like. And I was going to take this $20 bill and kind of start holding a cigar lighter up to it and then ask you, why would I not do this? Any suggestions on why I would not light this on fire? I mean, Randy, you're an accountant.
It sounds kind of wasteful.
It does sound kind of wasteful. All right, there'd be that one. What else?
Could start your house on fire.
I could also, once you start fire, you never really know where it's going to stop. That too. Well, why else might this be a bad idea?
Just it's simply illogical to do something like that.
It is kind of illogical, right? Because there's value here. It seems ever decreasing sometimes, but there is value here, and we don't want that. Also, there's that whole law about defacing currency. So that I don't know if we're all as concerned about that one, but there is one very basic truth that we've skipped over. What will happen if I light this on fire? The fire will eat it. It will be gone, right? It will transform it. It will eat it. It will be gone. Anything that you light on fire, when it's done burning, it's gone. It's done. It's not there anymore. It has changed completely, right? The easiest way, in a way, the easiest way to get rid of something is you light it on fire and then it goes away. This is how, this is how Dad tells me, Aunt Roberta, that garbage went away on the farm all the time, right? Light it on fire and it's gone. And so that very basic truth, imagine, hold that in your head as we start reading, and I think you start to understand just exactly why Moses was so shocked as he's just wandering around in the desert and he sees this bush that's on fire. And that very basic question comes into his mind: why doesn't the fire eat it? Why is it still there? Why isn't it gone? Kind of a funny basic thing that I guess I never really appreciated until I thought about it, that, yeah, Moses probably watched that bush for a while. There's a fire burning over there. Well, I better keep the sheep away from it. Oh, the fire's still going. Oh, the fire's still going. The fire's still going. Must have been a very odd, strange experience. But place to start, great place to start is to read some scripture. And so we'll start in Exodus chapter 3 with verse 1. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for those of you who there we go. So Exodus chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, What is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. So, salutations. Is there a movie that makes any of you think of? I think Lori might have said Charlotte's Web. Yes, yeah.
Yes.
In Charlotte's Web, when Charlotte, greets Wilbur the pig, Yeah, it's kind of a strange thing. Salutations. You immediately know something about Charlotte because she uses that word. Charlotte has a very large vocabulary, especially for a spider, but just I've never said salutations to anybody. I doubt any of you have walked up to somebody and said salutations. The author of that book is giving you a hint about who Charlotte is simply by how she greets Wilbur. In verses 5 and 6, God introduces himself to Moses. Anave salutations, I'm God. What can you learn about God from the way he introduces himself? So starting there. Oops, that's not what I want. Verses 5 and 6 here. God introduces himself to Moses. What can you tell about God? What facts, what feelings do you get out of the way God introduces himself?
First, he's holy.
He is holy and is not to be messed with, right? There's that.
Back to your analogy of the $20 bill, he's seeing something that's supernatural that he doesn't even believe at first.
Yeah. And Moses is not comfortable. Moses is not comfortable at all. What else? That's about that part. Because that's where he really identifies himself too, right? We've got these warnings about the sandals and the holy ground. You see Moses' uncomfortableness. Put yourself in Moses' place here. What does this tell Moses?
Ooh. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I just think it was funny because you and Randy, not only were you physically sitting next to each other, on my screen, your pictures were also next to each other. So it was the happy couple. But go ahead, Lori. What were you going to say?
Well, this kind of pertains to it all. It says, do not come any closer. We should keep our distance.
Yeah. And because just as two microphones cannot be live and be close to each other, so also God, the Lord is, he cannot be in the presence of something sinful. Yeah, it just doesn't really mix, does not really work. But looking at this part too, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the Lord is going through that line of the promise. Those of you who maybe took Following the Promise class with Pastor Nate, that line of the promise going all the way through the Old Testament, God is also identifying himself with that promise, with that faithfulness, saying, this is me. I am the God who is this faithful God who has been the God of your ancestors, and I still am. So you see in this introduction to Moses, how does God present himself? He also presents himself as the God of law and gospel. He presents himself as the God that, I am very serious about all of this, and also the God of promises, the God of grace, the God of faithfulness, the God of this ongoing, faithful relationship that he's had with human beings. Any other thoughts about that one? Otherwise, I'll move on. I'm probably not going to ask for other thoughts, but you can always interrupt me and tell me to go back. Otherwise, I'll sound like a broken record every time asking you a question, and you all go no on the screen. But always feel free to make me go back if you want to. So next one, humility, or is it something else? from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 17. If you're ever wondering where we are in scripture, each one of the discussion questions will also reference back to which chunk of the Bible we're talking about. And then the question itself will usually help you zero in even closer. Considering verses 7 to 10, why does Moses' objection in verse 11 make sense? Why does it make no sense at all? So looking at this one, considering 7 to 10, the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? So considering those verses, why does Moses' objection in verse 11, who am I to go do this? Why does it make sense? Why does it make no sense at all? What do you think about Moses?
The first part, I would say he was one of the reasons, or he lived amongst the people that oppressed the Israelites for so long.
Yeah.
Felt unworthy of doing God's work. I think that may have been a thought that ran through his head.
Yes.
But conversely, once he found out who he was, he may have felt obligated that these are my people and I need to do God's bidding.
And he made that attempt before too, didn't he? Yeah, it wasn't the wisest way to go about doing it. He went and killed that Egyptian foreman. I think later on it's Stephen, when he's standing in front of the Sanhedrin, says, Moses thought that the people of Israel would recognize that he was trying to deliver them. They did not. And so Moses could say, I tried this before, it failed. Here I am sitting here doing nothing. Did somebody want to make a comment? I thought I saw somebody come off mute. No, okay, that's fine. And then also just this is a huge task. This is an absolutely huge task. Think about how much negotiation and how much difficulty it takes to get a hostage exchange to happen. We've had that sort of thing in our nation with other nations. We want to set a couple of people free from captivity in another nation. God is telling Moses, hey, go to the most powerful nation on earth and get 2 million people out of there. It's an insane task. It's absolutely huge. Now, so that's why it makes sense. Why does it make absolutely no sense at all? What is the subject of just about every sentence in here? You notice that? Is the subject of those sentences Moses? No, it's I.
It's all about
Go ahead.
It's not, God is pointing to the people. That he has to work for the Lord and help his people.
And it's not like the Lord is saying, Moses, you just go do this. But now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I have seen, right? I have heard. I have come down to rescue them. Isn't it amazing how often and how quickly God tells us things in Scripture that he is going to do? And even if he's going to do them through us, it's amazing how quickly we forget about the through us and just think, I have to do this. One of my favorite examples is the feeding the 5,000 in the Gospel of John. Jesus says to his disciples, where are we going to find food for all these people to eat? And the very next verse is saying Jesus knew already what he was going to do. Jesus asked this only to test them because he already knew what he was going to do. I've heard it described as we are all greedy. We are very greedy, not necessarily for money. We are all greedy for problems. We want to pretend that they belong to us. They do not. They belong to our God. He works through us. He works in us. Ultimately, especially when it's something like this. Yeah. It's not like this is even really Moses' job. It's the Lord's job. And yet Moses immediately took it on himself. Who am I? Who am I? This is one of my favorite parts of this whole Bible story. Something I never really understood, especially as a kid. What good is that? So in verse 12, let's take a look at verse 12, where God gives the first of his signs to Moses. And once God starts giving Moses signs, this is the part where I think it starts getting good, right? Because I personally would love to have signs from God. It would be absolutely fantastic. I only really asked for one once. It was after I was a pretty little kid. It was after I was wrestling with one of my cousins in my Aunt Barb's basement, and I stepped on a toothpick. And I did not know this, but the toothpick broke off in my foot because I just saw something sticking out of my foot, and so I grabbed it and I threw it away. But I saw it sticking out of my foot, and later on, as my foot started to turn green, I prayed a prayer. My little child self, I got up in the middle of the night, or like what I thought was the middle of the night, walked out, sat down in the chair in the living room, and said, God, if the toothpick is still in my foot, please let it be 4:04 in the morning. If it's not in my foot, please let it be any other time. So then I walked over to the microwave, and I remember how small I was because I had to look up at the microwave, and it was 4:04 in the morning. Do you know how I felt immediately after that? Scared. I did not feel better. I gotten my sign from God, right? Did I feel better? No. Actually, I was more scared because now I was going, I don't know if this is good. I don't know if this is bad, right? I was all nervous. Later on, my mother handed me a stick and told me to bite on it, and she sat on me and pulled a toothpick out of my foot because that's the kind of mother that I have. But this idea, though, if I could have a sign from God, if I could know what God is thinking, if I could know what God wants, if I could see it for myself, I think that's a pretty common feeling that we want to have. And so Moses is in this very nerve-wracking spot. He's been asked to do a huge thing. He's not really trusting God with it. And this is the first sign that God gives to Moses. Verse 12, and God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Anybody see a problem with this sign from God? That might make it slightly less useful in the moment?
How is he going to see God? Is right next to him or is with him?
How's he going to know? How is he going to know that God will be with him? Right? There's a challenge there, right? Put this on a timeline. Moses is here right now, right? After this, he has to go and lead God's people out of Egypt, right? Then, after this, he will worship God on this mountain. What good does this do Moses now?
Right. That's too far off, and it's after the fact.
It's after the fact, right? God, if you're going to give me a sign, I want it now.
Yeah.
Right? I want to be able to see it now. What is God actually? What's that? Sounds like Peter? Oh, Or are you
Sounds
saying
like your dad.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah,
You
I do.
sound like your
Especially when I have
dad,
a cold,
Peter.
then my voice gets lower. But that idea of, you know, he's telling him, God is telling Moses what's going to happen. What do we usually call that? We don't usually call that a sign. What do we usually call it when God tells us what's going to happen?
Prophecy.
Prophecy. We
Yeah.
might even use another word more commonly, starting with a P.
Prediction.
Prediction, even more common in church than prediction. A promise. So
Promise.
God is giving Moses a promise. The first sign that he gives him is not a magic trick. And I use magic trick loosely. You know, eventually he's going to be throwing a stick on the ground and it's going to turn into a snake. He's going to put his hand into his cloak and it's going to come out leprous. I mean, those look to us like magic tricks. Those we go, oh, there's a sign from God, right? But what does God give Moses first? A promise. Gives Moses a promise. What does God want Moses to do with that promise? He wants him to trust it. Trust me. So the Lord says to Moses, hey, I'm going to use you to do something amazing. We're going to go do this, you and me, Moses. Moses goes, I don't know about the me or the you. Or, yeah, I don't know about the myself part of this. This doesn't sound right to me. I don't think I can do this. Maybe you should pick somebody else, or God, you should just do it yourself. He goes, I don't know about this. And God's immediate response to Moses is, I mean, that's just so obviously a promise, right? I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Sometime down the road, Moses, you're going to look back and realize that I did just exactly what I said I would do. Now, does that sound familiar to anybody? I have had that experience where I can look back and go, turns out that God was faithful just like he promised he would be. God did exactly what he said he would do. If there's anything that makes you trust God more and more and more, it's when you can see him making promises and keeping them. So yeah, there's the first kind of sign that God gives Moses, and it's the exact same kind of sign that he gives you and me over and over and over again in Scripture. Promise after promise after promise, and then he keeps them over and over and over and over again. Yeah, is it perfect? What is this sign that God gives Moses? Really, it's a promise. Why is that the perfect kind of sign for Moses' situation? Everything is coming up. And there are so many things that so many times that Moses is going to need to rely on God. So many times that Moses is going to have to trust God. Think about all the plagues. How many times Moses is going to have to go in front of the most powerful man in the world and say, God says something's going to happen. Again and again and again, Moses is going to have to go in front of him and say, God is making, well, a threat, which is kind of a negative promise, and it's going to come true. The Lord is getting Moses used to, I make a promise, you trust me, I keep it. Next, notice the name. Verse 13, Moses asks God to identify himself, and God does. He identifies himself as I am, Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord, all those different ways of talking about that special name for God that emphasize the same truth, our God's constant faithfulness. The Lord our God is the only one who can truly say I am. Has nothing to do with I will be, or I was, or I could become, or I used to be. Always I am. He is changeless, and because he is changeless, he's absolutely faithful. You think about that, and also as you look at that, the way things are going here. So we've got the Lord right there, right? in verse 4. And then it switches. Do not come any closer, God said. I'm going to unhighlight this here. And, I am the God of your father, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He was afraid to look at God. Now, the Lord, as he was being faithful to his people, introduced that way. But Moses said to God, and God said, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to them and say, the God of your fathers sent to me. What should I tell them? God said to Moses, but the Lord. And then all the way through the rest of this, it is the Lord making promises. The Lord speaking to Moses. The Lord said to him. The Lord said, all the way through here, except for one exception that we'll come to later. It's the Lord, this faithful God, this God who keeps his promises, this God who is so faithful to Moses. So why is this name perfect for Moses' situation? Well, he needs to trust the promises of the Lord. And now God is giving Moses, the Lord is giving Moses a message for the Israelites when he goes there. Think about the situation that the Israelites are in. For 400 years, they've been enslaved. For 400 years, the biggest promise in their minds, in their collective consciousness, is we're supposed to have a promised land coming. Being enslaved in Egypt is about the opposite of the promised land. You'd think after maybe 400 years, you might go, well, maybe it turns out that God can't keep his promise. Maybe after 400 years, God has changed. Maybe 400 years later, God changed his mind and he's not faithful to us anymore. What message does God send back to Moses with Moses? I am. Christine.
A thought came to mind about when he said, who should I say you are? Doesn't Moses recognize the name? I mean, if the Israelites going to have to recognize that name, doesn't Moses too? I mean, I'm just wondering.
It's not that I don't think that name is new to them by any means.
Right.
But just how are we making sure we've got the right God? How can I convince them that this is you are who you say you are, and that you matter. 400 years of slavery, I think, would also do something to somebody's mindset too. It takes quite a bit for the people of Israel to be convinced also that they should follow Moses and follow the Lord. First time anything goes wrong, think toward the Moses shows up, and as soon as Moses shows up, do things get better for the Israelites? No, they get worse. Suddenly they have to make bricks with no straw, right? And their first reaction is, Moses, leave us alone. We don't want anything to do with you, Moses. That they've been beat down for so long, they need a faithful God, because they can't be faithful for more than 10 minutes anyway, right? It's kind of been beaten out of them over the last 400 years. Why is this name perfect for your situation? I think it's a pretty common thing to think to ourselves, maybe God changed his mind. Maybe God isn't really on my side. Maybe God really doesn't feel the way. Maybe God doesn't really love me. Maybe God won't forgive me. Loves you just as much the day you were baptized. Loves you just as much as the day Jesus died on the cross for you. There is no change in him. There is no abandonment in him. This is the God who will be there no matter what. All right, so now we'll move on to Exodus 3:18 to 4:9, unless anybody has any questions on that first chunk. So Exodus 3:18 to 4:9. The Lord says, the elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and will strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. Now put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these 2 signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. So, Exodus 3:18 to 4:9, compare Exodus 3:18 to Exodus 4:1. What mistake is Moses making? So we got, we can see them both right here. Exodus 3:18 is right there. 4:1 right there. What mistake is Moses making?
He's not trusting God.
Not at all, is he? Yeah, God comes straight out and says to him, the elders of Israel will listen to you, right? First words out of Moses' mouth. What if the elders of Israel do not listen to me? He's not there yet, is he? And the way you said it, Sue, he is not trusting the Lord. He is not. He hasn't gotten to that place yet where he's holding on to God's promises or anything like that. Because that's what this is right here, Exodus 3:18. The elders of Israel will listen to you. That's a promise. Moses isn't holding on to it. Moses' first reaction to the promise is, really? Are they gonna listen to me? Which at first could seem kind of, come on, Moses. Really, Moses? Why? How could you make that mistake that God would tell you this exact thing, and the very first thing you come back with is, what if that won't happen, God? Again, I don't think that is a real uncommon reaction to God's promises. I think we tend to, as soon as God makes us a promise, one of the first things that we want to do is go, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Often our first reaction is to doubt that promise. And especially when God spoke those exact words to Moses, and then only a few seconds later, Moses comes back with pretty blatantly saying, I don't trust you, God. At that point, Moses deserves to have God just go and squash it. God could have just been done with Moses. Right? Yeah. If you're not going to listen to me, Moses, this isn't going to work. This relationship's not going to happen. Instead, what response does he get from the Lord? He gets some pretty cool signs. And that maybe next one here. Boom, magic stick. I would love to have Moses's magic stick. Can you imagine how easy that would make my life? as the campus planter at the Bridge Milwaukee. Oh, it would be great. I could like walk around Milwaukee with my magic stick and say to people, you should come to our church. And if they say, why? Say, look at this. And I would drop my magic stick and it would turn into a snake. And then I would pick it up and it would turn it back into a staff and they would be amazed. And it would be fantastic. And they would come to my church, right? Or if somebody said, how can I know that this Jesus person is real? I could just go, magic stick, right? Oh, I don't know, even like, daily life. One of my kids said, Dad, I don't think that I should listen to you and that you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, magic stick. Just over and over and over again, I would want to be using this magic stick. And yet, even as the Lord gives Moses this magic stick, what does this sign, and isn't it great that it's instant too? It's not like this promise from before where he has to wait for years until he shows up on the mountain for it to come through. It's just instantaneous, right? Oh, that's cool. But what does this sign require from Moses? And the hint is to figure out what it requires. How did the Lord tell Moses to pick up the snake?
By the tail.
By the tail. Does that sound like a good idea?
No,
No. What happens if you pick up a venomous snake by the tail?
I don't know for
You
sure. I
didn't.
never did it.
Yeah, you didn't do it because it's just not a smart thing to do, right?
I would
It
imagine
will
it
turn
could
around and
turn
bite you.
around pretty fast.
Yeah, it will turn around and bite you. I once looked up instructions on WikiHow on how to pick up a venomous snake, and you can tell it's a venomous snake because Moses has been a shepherd now for 40 years. He's been wandering this wilderness. He knows what a dangerous snake looks like, and so he runs from it, right? And so if you need to pick up a venomous snake, the first thing in the WikiHow article I read said, "Why are you picking up the snake? Don't pick up the snake. This is a bad idea. The only time snakes get picked up in the wild is when something wants to eat them. So it's going to fight you. And so, but if you absolutely have to, take a stick, a long stick, pin it behind the head, grab it as close behind the head as you can, and pick it up that way. And it's going to wrap around your arm, but that's okay because all you have to worry about is the head. Don't worry about the tail. The tail can't hurt you. Only worry about the head." And God says to Moses, pick it up by the tail. What must Moses do as he reaches down and picks up that tail? Trust
Yeah.
the Lord that this snake is not going to bite him. God doesn't give out many magic sticks. I'm pretty sure this is no. There was also Aaron's staff that budded. That was pretty cool too, right? Maybe there's another one in there. I don't know. But even when God gives him this, it requires that Moses still trust him. In that way, it is no different from the promise sign that God gave him before. What God is saying to Moses, even as he gives him this incredible thing, is still trust. Bonus, how does the second sign with Moses' hand in his cloak require the same thing as the staff snake sign? I don't know about you, but if somebody told me, if you put your hand inside your clothes, it will come out with a terrible disfiguring disease, I am never getting changed again, right? And so you put it in there, you pull it out, and it's going to be covered in leprosy. Well, then Moses also has to trust the Lord that it's going to work the second time and come out clean, right? Each time, God is saying, Moses, you're still going to have to trust me.
One of the things I love about this part of the story is the endless grace God keeps showering on him.
Yeah.
Step by step by step.
Yeah. The patience of our God in dealing with Moses. The relationship didn't start awesome. It's starting pretty rocky. And yet God, over and over, like you say, just grace in place of grace in place of grace, over and over and over.
Yep.
All right, so now Exodus 4:10-17. This is really where we see God's patience, and actually we also see in a way God losing his patience a little bit. So 4:10 to 17. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord." Interesting. This is not a typo right here. See the difference between that one and that one? Moses said to the Lord, the faithful God, right? The God who keeps his promises. Moses said to the faithful God, "Pardon your servant," and maybe here instead, master, right? He doesn't say, "Pardon your servant, faithful God who keeps his promises." He says, "Pardon your servant, master. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, master. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it." I love how the last thing was, you remember the magic stick, right? Just take it and go. Come on, just go, right? But now getting back here, in Exodus 4:10, Moses starts trying to weasel his way out of the Lord's call. What is Moses' hang up in verse 10? What's his hang up here in verse 10? I think I heard somebody say something about him not being a very good speaker. Interestingly enough, I think that this might be the most eloquent way a person has ever said they're not eloquent. Do you notice that?
That's true, yeah.
"Pardon your servant, master. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." It sounds like Shakespeare, right? First of all, it's probably not all that true. And secondly, let's simplify it even further. His hang-up is himself. Who is he still looking at? Himself. You think back all the way through everything we've read. The Lord, the faithful God, has been doing everything he can, except for maybe, I don't know if you've ever had this situation where you've been trying so hard to get like your little kid to pay attention to you. You literally have to reach out, grab them by the noggin and point them at you and go, "No, I'm here," right? "I love you and I'm here." That's how I kind of see God dealing with Moses. Over and over and over again. He's got to reach out, grab him by the noggin and just go, hey, me, not you, me, right? Because what is the Lord's solution for Moses' hangup? Himself. Moses' hangup is himself. The Lord's solution is himself. Do you think I made the wrong choice, Moses? Do you think that even if you weren't so eloquently saying that you're not eloquent, do you think that the Lord can't make him eloquent now? Sure he can. Like this, kind of like how he can make a bush not burn up or whatever he wants. This is the Lord, the God of all, who can do whatever he wants. Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. How does this same hang-up affect us? How does the Lord's answer change your perspective on challenges and difficulties in your life? We are all that little kid. I know how many times constantly thinking, oh, there's this challenge in my life, there's this difficulty, there's this pain, there's this struggle, there's this whatever. And the first thing that I do is curl myself up in a ball and look at my own belly button and say, I don't find the answer. And I'm surprised every time that I do not find the answer in my own belly button. You would think that eventually I would figure out that there are no answers in there, and uncurl myself, look up at the Lord my God, the ruler of the universe, the creator of all things, my Savior, the one who has prepared a place for me in heaven, and say, maybe he has the solution. Maybe I should trust him. Also, the more twisted in on himself Moses gets, the less effective he becomes. The more he uncurls himself and focuses on the Lord his God, the more effective he becomes. I mean, he does kind of become quite possibly the greatest leader in the history of the people of Israel when he stops looking at himself and starts trusting in the Lord as God. So it's one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. What does Moses deserve after verse 13? Yeah, God has given him every possible answer. And Moses just goes, oh, God, just send somebody else. Right? I mean, oh, so whiny. So whiny. What does he deserve at that point? He really deserves, well, he certainly deserves the Lord's anger, right? But he deserves a whole lot more than that. He deserves God to act in his anger. And I find it really fascinating that it is the Lord's anger burned against Moses. The Lord's anger burned against Moses. And what did that result in? Did that result in the Lord abandoning Moses or leaving Moses? Let's do a timeline again. The Lord's talking to Moses, right? Begins his conversation with Moses. The Lord says, Moses absolutely bombs it, completely, ultimately is rude to God, right? I'll just find somebody else. And no, it's pretty obvious he wants you, right? And then the Lord said, Aaron is already on his way to meet you. When did the Lord put into action this final grace toward Moses? Because that's what it is. Sending Aaron is incredible grace. When did God put that into action?
Right away.
Possibly even here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Aaron is already on his way to meet you. The Lord sends Aaron to Moses before the Lord calls Moses. The Lord comes to Moses with this incredible privilege to Moses. And in a way, ultimately the whole relationship what is this incredible relationship between God and Moses based on? The Lord wants to interact with Moses based on faith, doesn't he? He wants Moses to trust him. He wants you to trust him. He wants me to trust him. That's why he gave him the promise. That's why he gave him all of those signs just the way he gave them, so that Moses had to trust him. And all the while through, the Lord was kind of trusting Moses to be his servant, even though the Lord knew that Moses would try to weasel his way out of it. And he sends Aaron first, knowing that Moses is going to do all of these things, and yet he still goes and asks Moses anyway. It's my favorite thing about grace is when you can see evidence of how undeserved God's grace is, that God was already planning for how Moses would fail before God even gave him the privilege. I mean, that's grace. It's incredible grace. Let's see. Bonus, more than anything, the Lord wanted Moses to trust him. Did the Lord trust Moses?
Yes.
He did.
Mm-hmm.
in a way he did, because he said, I'm going to come to this guy and I'm going to give him this incredible privilege, right? Did Moses prove himself to be worthy of that trust?
Mm-mm.
No. Did the Lord need to trust Moses to love Moses? Or actually, I wrote that. Did the Lord need to know that Moses was trustworthy to love him, to use him, to all of those? No. The Lord knew right off the bat, Moses is going to mess this up. And in fact, the Lord planned for that in advance and yet still carried all of this through. What does that mean for you and me? Wow, God is trustworthy. In my relationship with God, I have proven myself to be otherwise so many times. And yet, he comes back, he comes back, he comes back, he comes back. God comes to us and says, trust me. And so often we don't. And God could have forced Moses to do what he wanted, just like God could force you and me to do what he wanted. Instead, he loves us and he trusts us to respond. And yet we let him down so often, he continues to trust us. The whole relationship back and forth, us and God, is all about trust. I don't know if I'm conveying that very well. Is that coming through?
Mhm.
All right. Trust and grace. Those two things coming together is what all this means. And I forgot to explain why. And a hush falls over the room. I don't know how many of you have siblings, but that moment where one of your siblings says something really stupid to your dad, just really dumb, and not just stupid, but like rebellious stupid, and then the whole room just goes, whoa. It's kind of how I picture like that. If I was there with Moses when Moses just goes, oh, Lord, just send someone else to do it. Just like that moment of just, oh, you really shouldn't have done that, Moses. And yet God still responds to him with, even though God's mad at him, and justifiably so, God is still responding to him with, I'm not giving up on you, Moses. In fact, I planned for this. In grace, I planned for this from the beginning. So,
Do you think in this conversation, God used inflection? Was there a voice and Moses could pick up on that when he says, pardon me, Lord? He's picking up on some kind of inflection in God's voice.
I think that if God was going to speak to Moses, he would have spoken to him as a human would speak. Yeah, because ultimately that's what this is, right? This is God is personifying himself. He's humanifying himself. He's meeting Moses on his own level.
Yeah.
I think that in this case, as well as like with Job, when God comes and speaks to Job out of the storm, there was inflection. There was emotion there. And yeah, you can see the nervousness in Moses. And I think that reveals something too. Pardon your servant, Lord. Yeah. He knows better.
Yeah.
He knows he shouldn't be doing this. He knows he shouldn't be saying this, and yet he does anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Let me see. I think we got. Is there one more? Yeah. Everybody starts somewhere. Oh, I forgot to write anything in there. Point of this one was just going to be just that. I marvel that one of the greatest relationships between the Lord our God and a human started in this spot. Started in this place with Moses saying, I don't really want it, God. I'm not willing. I'm not interested. God giving him chance after chance. And not only that, but just answering every single one of his objections. Never does God simply just look at him and say, because I said so. Which if anyone has ever had the right to look at anyone and say, because I said so, God could have done that with Moses. Yeah, I don't want to, God. No, you're going to do it because I say so. That's it. That would have been an acceptable answer. And yet you see so much grace in the Lord's answer. And all the way through, even to the very end of this account, you never hear Moses saying, sorry, God. You never hear Moses saying, yes, okay. I mean, the next verse is, then Moses went, he did obey, but you don't even get that thing from Moses. And I know it might be a little bit of an argument from silence, so I don't want to make it be too strong, but you don't ever see Moses go, I am sorry, Lord my God, you are right. I will do everything you tell me. It just starts in this place where the Lord is, no, it is all on him and all on his grace. And the Lord is putting himself out there over and over and over again, saying, I am trustworthy. I am trustworthy. Trust me. So if you feel like your relationship with the Lord your God is not what you would like it to be, everybody starts somewhere. The goal here is not to figure out whether or not you're good enough for God. It's the Lord is here to prove just how good and how faithful he is to you. And that is going to grow something amazing in you, just like it grew something amazing in Moses. So yeah, doesn't matter where you start, it matters where God takes you.
It also seems like
Go ahead.
it also sounds like a mentoring kind of thing for us to follow.
Yeah. How so?
Well, I mean, if we had a conversation with someone that we saw had potential and they just weren't there yet, and especially in the work in anything to do with working in the Lord's service and in his mission field or anything, you see someone, I know you'd be perfect for this, and just don't give up on them. And treat them, I mean, God really treated him with respect when we would probably show our exasperation very early.
Yeah, it took God quite a while, much longer than it would have taken me.
Yeah. Well, then
Yeah.
have your way, go away.
Right. But that, to give somebody that patience, that time that the Lord has given to each of us.
It's like an investment.
Yeah. Oh, God has invested far more in us than we could ever invest in him or in his service. He kind of invested his son in us. So that in addition to every other little thing he's done. God is invested in you, and that's a pretty cool thought. So we began this with this study with the idea of Moses and God seeming like unlikely friends, and how in the world is this relationship going to take place? Ultimately, the foundation of that relationship is trust. The trust that God is willing to show Moses, even though Moses will prove himself unworthy of it, and just how trustworthy God is going to prove himself to be to Moses. And just how patient God is going to be while Moses figures that out. It takes us a while to learn trust. And God is willing to stand in and teach it to us. Anybody, any thoughts, questions about this one? Then I will have next week's stuff. Oh, it looks like I've got something in the chat. Somebody used the chat, which is a great idea. Oh, cool. Some replies in Canvas. Thank you, Randy. That is also a good reminder. If there's any Canvas things that you want to take a look at, Randy, would you like us to discuss those now, or would you like those to be things to maybe discuss online?
Discuss online.
Great, thank you, Randy. That's a great idea. Keep an eye on that. It can be a way to kind of keep this in your head and in your heart over the next few days until we meet again. I will have some things up for the next one a little bit early, and I'll send out an email for you so that you can kind of ponder those. You might want to put a comment or two in as we go, especially if you're one that you go, I don't know if I like talking on the video. You can take a peek early, put your comments in, and then I can respond to them as we go through next week. So yeah, next week will be Tuesday at 7 o'clock, and I will see you then. And
Thank
if you
you.
need help with Canvas, please stay on. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you now. See you soon. See you next
Yeah.
week.
See you
Thanks.
then.
Bye.
Right.
Thank you. I guess I don't need help with